We also have to make the economy fairer. That starts with raising the national minimum wage.
Minimum wage is supposed to help the poorer, less skilled, and younger workers in the economy, but it doesn't. It gets them fired. Employment happens as a result of human choices. For example, let's say some kid named Jimmy knocks on your door and wants to know if you can mow your lawn. If your lawn really needs to be mowed, you might choose to employ him for $10. If he charges $20, we might still not complain. But if he charges $50, $100, $1,000, at some point that job will not be created. Jimmy will be unemployed. Why is this? It isn't because you're greedy, but simply because you value $100 more than that service being provided. In this case, your lawn being mowed. An employer has to believe that the value created by an employee is greater than his cost. And that is why minimum wage laws cause unemployment. It is impossible to sustain employing anyone doing work which is valued less than their wage. The higher the minimum wage, the sooner Jimmy is out of a job. When employment costs increase, entrepreneurs have two choices. They can reduce the amount of people they employ, or they can raise the price of the goods they produce. Otherwise, they're in the red. This makes the minimum wage a double whammy. Even if you don't lose your job, you and everyone else in the economy will be forced to pay for more expensive goods. Now that's counterproductive.
I think my husband did a pretty good job in the 1990s. I think a lot about what worked and how we can make it work again.
The Clinton administration presided over the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act, a key deregulatory move widely seen as helping lead to the nation's financial collapse. The repeal ended the separation of commercial and investment banking. In this clip from before the 1999 vote, Senator Byron Dorgan of South Dakota predicted how the repeal would be remembered on its 10th anniversary.
We are, with this piece of legislation, moving towards greater risk. We are almost certainly moving towards substantial new concentration and mergers in the financial services industry. That is almost certainly not in the interest of consumers, and we are deliberately and certainly with this legislation moving towards inheriting much greater risk in our financial services industries. And so I come to the floor to say that I regret that I cannot support the legislation. I think we will, in 10 years' time, look back and say we should not have done that.
Once that Glass-Steagall was repealed, it allowed investment banks, the casino of Wall Street, to invade commercial banks and commercial deposits, and it allowed investment bankers to utilize commercial deposits for essentially gambling. Amy, and that combined with these investment banks going public, becoming publicly held companies, really opened the floodgates to an era of even greater casino capitalism than we had before.
Secretary of State, and I have
Your husband signed NAFTA, which was one of the worst things that ever happened to the manufacturing industry.
That is your opinion.
You go to New England, you go to Ohio, Pennsylvania, you go anywhere you want, Secretary Clinton, and you will see devastation where manufacturing is down 30, 40, sometimes 50%. NAFTA is the worst trade deal maybe ever signed anywhere, but certainly ever signed in this country. And now you want to approve Trans-Pacific Partnership. You were totally in favor of it. Then you heard what I was saying, how bad it is, and you said, I can't win that debate. But you know that if you did win, you would approve that, and that will be almost as bad as NAFTA. Nothing will ever top NAFTA.
That is just not accurate. I was against it once it was finally negotiated and the terms were laid out. I wrote about that in...
You called it the gold standard.
Well, I hope...
You called it the gold standard of trade deals. You said it's the finest deal you've ever seen.
No.
And then you heard what I said about it, and all of a sudden you were against it.
Well, one of the highlights of President Clinton's first term, passage of the North American Free Trade Agreement, also known as NAFTA. Critics blame NAFTA for the loss of manufacturing jobs in industrial states, including Ohio and Pennsylvania. Hillary Clinton helped get NAFTA approved. She held at least 5 meetings to strategize about how to win congressional approval. She helped the White House block opposition from labor and environmental groups, and she was the featured speaker at a crucial meeting. Participants in that event said, quote, her remarks were totally pro-NAFTA. There was no equivocation for her support for NAFTA at the time.
Oh, I think that everybody is in favor of free and fair trade, and I think that NAFTA is proving its worth.
I think on balance, NAFTA has been good for New York and America.
I have been a critic of NAFTA from the very beginning. My concerns about NAFTA expressed years ago have been well documented and verified. I didn't have a public position on it. I have spoken consistently against NAFTA. And if you look at what I have been saying, it has been consistent. I have been consistent. You can go back and look at from the very beginning. I was one of the voices in the administration warning about NAFTA. We are making progress toward finalizing a far-reaching new trade agreement called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The so-called TPP will lower barriers, raise standards, and drive long-term growth. I did say when I was Secretary of State 3 years ago that I hoped it would be the gold standard. There's no doubt that we have other problems with Iran, but personally I'd rather deal with the other problems having put that lid on their nuclear program than still to be facing that. And Donald never tells you what he would do. Would he have started a war? Would he have bombed Iran? If he's going to criticize a deal that has been very successful in giving us access to Iranian facilities that we never had before, then he should tell us what his alternative would be. But I want the Iranians to know that if I'm the president, we will attack Iran. And I want them to understand that, because it does mean that they have to look very carefully at their society. Because whatever stage of development they might be in their nuclear weapons program in the next 10 years, during which they might foolishly consider launching an attack on Israel, we would be able to totally obliterate them.
I think that we should be looking to create an umbrella of deterrence that goes much further than just Israel. Of course, I would make it clear to the Iranians that an attack on Israel would incur massive retaliation from the United States, but I would do the same with other countries in the region.
The potential for a nuclear attack by Iran, if Iran does achieve what appears to be its continuing goal of obtaining nuclear weapons, and I think deterrence has not been effectively used in recent times. We used it very well during the Cold War when we had a bipolar world. And what I think the president should do, and what our policy should be, is to make it very clear to the Iranians that they would be risking massive retaliation were they to launch a nuclear attack on Israel. Clearly, as Donald just admitted, he knew he was going to stand on this debate stage and Lester Holt was going to be asking us questions, so he tried to put the whole racist birther lie to bed. But it can't be dismissed that easily. He has really started his political activity based on this racist lie that our first black president was not an American citizen. There was absolutely no evidence for it, but he persisted. He persisted year after year because some of his supporters, people that he was trying to bring into his fold, apparently believed it or wanted to believe it.
Obama's support among hardworking Americans, white Americans, is weakening again.
Hardworking white Americans. I mean, Hillary Clinton flat out said it.
Her electability argument boils down, in effect, to working class white Americans are not ready to vote for a black American president.
Yeah, it was fairly shocking. I suppose at this rate, by the time we get to Kentucky, it'll be segregation now, segregation forever.
Race remains a significant challenge in our country. So I have, ever since the first day of my campaign, called for criminal justice reform.
There are people who are on the streets and involved in this movement who were there in '96 when the Welfare Reform Act was passed. They were there in 1994 when the Violent Crime Act was passed. They have a sense of how Clinton had a part in proliferating and spreading a lot of the problems that we're talking about now.
It's a very well thought out crime bill that is both smart and tough. And we will eventually get a good crime bill like the president has proposed. It'll just take a little longer than it should have.
In addition to what we saw, which is her speaking the talking points of the prison guards lobby, we also saw her come out to invoke the idea of super predators to push for these crime bills.
They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy.
It was never used to describe anyone white. It was always used to describe young black men as a mass.
Cannot keep imprisoning more people than anybody else in the world.
Does no one else see the hypocrisy? Forget about super predators in the 1994 crime bill. When Hillary Clinton said this, she was actively using lobbyists from two major private prison companies to raise campaign cash. And she only stopped taking money from associates of the GEO Group and Corrections Corporations of America after Black Lives Matter and other activists confronted her. But even now, she has campaign staffers that lobby directly for GEO Group on her payroll.
So I think we've got a very, we've got somebody saying here, we have to bring them
apologize for mass incarceration.
Okay, we'll talk
I'm
about
not a super predator, Hillary Clinton.
Okay, fine. Now, you want to hear the facts, you just want to talk. You know what? Nobody's ever asked me before. You're the first person to ask me, and I'm happy to address it, but you are the first person to ask me here. Okay, back to the issues.
He decided to profile Hispanics as drug dealers. Specifically, Arkansas troopers were to stop and search cars driven by Hispanics. Clinton's criminal apprehension program was ruled unconstitutional. Clinton's Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994, that legislation led to the mass incarceration of black Americans. Legal scholar Michelle Alexander notes, Bill Clinton presided over the largest increase in federal and state prison inmates of any president in American history. Alexander accused the Clintons of decimating black America and said Hillary does not deserve the black vote.
Protesters filled the streets of Chicago today rejecting Mayor Rahm Emanuel's apology for the fatal police shooting of 17-year-old Laquan McDonald.
This video and that death of Laquan McDonald happened before the election. What he did was cover up that information to conveniently be elected for mayor.
I don't understand, looking at the evidence that we now know is public, how any person, particularly a presidential candidate, can stand behind someone like Rahm Emanuel.